Have you ever seen Waterworld?
Well, no.
Me neither. But Kevin Costner was in it deep, investing tens of millions of his own money into production, having affairs on location, and demanding that the effects team CGI his receding hair. Oh, and that's without mentioning him almost dying after being tied to a mast for over 2 hours. All of this and much more sunk this damp Mad Max ripoff, the most expensive film ever made at the time. I spent far too long looking into this moist mess, so you didn't have to.
Oh, thank God.
Why was Kevin Costner so invested in this movie? Because he was so invested in the movie. This guy really put the cost in Costner, with $22 million of his own money into the production of the movie, which is the same amount that it cost to create the massive atoll set in the film. They must have had those guys who do timeshares at the studio, because in 1995, that's a lot of money to put into something, especially something being filmed at sea, something Steven Spielberg himself warned against doing. But as Steve knows, the sea is a cruel mistress, and she was particularly cruel to this production, which we'll look at in more detail shortly. But first, back to Costner and his ego. In 1995, he was one of the biggest stars in the world, up there with Tom Cruise and Arnold Schwarzenegger, after Oscar-winning hits Field of Dreams and Dances with Wolves. Also, honourable mention for The Bodyguard, which was nowhere near winning an Oscar, but spawned a karaoke song to be forever butchered by drunk people worldwide. Waterworld was on track to be a smash hit blockbuster that would catapult Costner to megastardom, but didn't quite end up like that. In fact, it ended up with him getting very wet, losing his wife, and almost losing his life. More on that later as well. Waterworld was actually intended as a children's film, but the movie's producers had only got it off the ground by promising a copycat Mad Max film, but set at sea, and this inspired a darker, apocalyptic tone, and script rewrites didn't help the vision of the movie, whatever that was.
What if we did Mad Max on water? Now that's different.
Joss Whedon of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and MCU fame was hired as an anonymous script doctor for the film, but this doctor would rather be on the beaches of Normandy during World War II, because Whedon said that he had a terrible time in the role, claiming that the job effectively boiled down to adding Costner's ideas to the script, which made it worse with every new thing that Costner demanded. If you put $22 million into a movie, how would you travel onto set? Well, Costner wanted to get as much bang for his buck as possible, so got to work in a luxury motorboat that Universal Studios had leased to him after enjoying a good night's rest at his $4,500 a day oceanfront villa, complete of course with a butler and a private pool. All while the crew members stayed in boiling condos devoid of air conditioning.
Why is it so hot in here?
I mean, you and I might use Costner's opportunity to treat your wife to a nice holiday, but the actor's then-wife Cindy Silver was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was thought he was spending his time with hula dancer Michelle Amaral. Spoiler alert, he wasn't taking extra classes, not in hula dancing anyway. Costner denied any after-work wetness, but the whole thing led to an $80 million divorce. So far, we're looking at Costner losing over $100 million to this movie, and we haven't really got started yet. The stresses of filming the movie lasted for an unexpected 6 months at sea. All in all, Costner spent 157 days on the set, while working 6 days a week. But everyone else around him also had to suffer because of his bizarre demands. One of my favourites is when he requested that the special effects department add computer-generated hair to hide his balding head, which added an ache to the effects team's collective head, as well as adding more money to an already very stretched budget. These days, a 10-year-old in his bedroom can add luscious locks to Kevin Costner, and the biggest problem would be for that 10-year-old to figure out who Kevin Costner is. But back in 1995, these kinds of effects cost top dollar. This, as well as other horror shows on set, took an already massive $100 million budget to $175. Costner's demands, like the casting couches of certain producers, became the thing of Hollywood infamy, and even in recent years, this kind of reputation has followed him around like a bodyguard, and for good reason. In his recent TV franchise, Yellowstone, he went a little too far, when in 2023, he presented the production team with a list of demands that needed to be met if he was ever going to return for the back half of the 5th season. Show creator Taylor Sheridan, presumably having been one of the few people to have seen Waterworld, didn't have any of this, and Yellowstone officially wrapped up without the star at the helm. Back to the safety of Pastel in the 90s now, and there's more costly Costner demands to look at. He was the one who urged Universal to hire director Kevin Reynolds instead of Robert Zemeckis or Lawrence Kasdan. And it seems weird that he was so insistent on doing this, as the two constantly fought on the set of the movie. I don't know, maybe it was like a relationship you have with your brother where you just can't stand him, but it's fun to fight with him every now and again. Things got so bad between the two Kevins that Reynolds left the film during post-production and Costner needed to finish editing duties himself. This probably didn't help the final movie, but at least this might have saved him a bit of money, because up until that point, the whole thing had cost a fortune. And none of that included hospital fees or medical supplies, because Poseidon knows this movie racked up a lot of those.
You can assume that we're all having a real lousy day.
In this movie, Waterworld is a dangerous place. It seems like the set was method acting better than the actors. Stars Jean Triplehorn and Tina Majorino, who was a child actress at the time, mind you, had to be rescued by divers when they were thrown off their slippery sets. Majorino was also repeatedly stung by a jellyfish, but even that's nothing in comparison to an embolism that almost cost Costner's stunt double Norman Howell his life after a dive when he returned to the surface too quickly. His compression sickness while shooting underwater got him helicoptered to a Honolulu hospital before recovering and returning to work a few days later. Now that's a pretty extreme sick note to fill in. Reason for absence? Almost dying. His other stunt double didn't get much luck either. Led Hamilton, known for big wave surfing, knew all about danger. However, Waterworld was a step too far. His jet ski ran out of fuel on his daily commute to set, and the Coast Guard had to help rescue him. Costner himself had his own near-death experience as well. For the hero shot of the mariner standing high up on his trimaran's 85-foot-tall mast while the sun sets, this was done for real, tied high atop the custom-built boat while his director and sparring partner filmed him from a helicopter. A fierce gale started pushing the boat further out to sea than anticipated, while Costner was swung wildly from side to side, stranded with no way to untether him safely. I mean, there's karma, but this seems a bit harsh for staying in an expensive villa. The director has recalled that understandably, he was not happy, whereas I assume the director would be lying if he said he didn't enjoy it slightly. Amazingly, it took 2 hours before Costner could be rescued, as the trimaran had to be sailed all the way around the island when it was finally calm enough to get him down. The sea, not Costner. He was furious. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there was an incident with an underwater cable that sent one crew member to the hospital to get 20 stitches in his stomach. Apart from that, filming was really safe. And based on that logic, it was really cheap as well. In fact, it actually was. Well, it was when they started writing the script anyway. Once Costner got his greedy diva hands all over it, the whole production snowballed, which is impressive seeing as they were in Hawaii.
Fact, you talk all the time. Storm when you're around.
So how did this movie go from being an easy-to-film feature to a juggernaut drowning in issues and money the studio didn't have? It wasn't just CGI hair. Early on, Waterworld was meant to be a cheap-to-make, simple movie. At this point, producer Roger Corman rejected the film, saying it'd be too costly to make. Nostradamus would have been proud. Amazingly, way before Costner had the chance to hula his way onto set, it was believed the film would need only $5 million to film. They were only $170 million away. It wasn't until our man, Kevin Costner, became part of the project that Waterworld looked for blockbuster status. So now they were in deep, and understandably the director, taking a break from fighting with his opposite Kevin, gave Steven Spielberg a call for some advice. After all, the guy knows a thing or two about filming at sea. Reynolds said, "Steven, I'm doing this Waterworld movie, and we're shooting on water. Do you have any advice for me?" Spielberg responded in a frank but very sensible manner. "Do not shoot on water. You're going to need a couple of shots on water, so use the second unit for that. Do all of your coverage in a tank or a stage." So of course they took his advice on board from one of the world's greatest directors and then threw it straight out into the ocean. That was the first decision that would help blow this movie's budget out of the water. Filming in a water tank was rejected in favour of filming at sea, but a water tank ended up being built in the ocean for the film anyway. That's like saying you're vegan and won't eat steak unless it's cooked inside of a chicken. Waterworld's crew chose Hawaii as a filming location, and I'm sure Costner had a say too, don't you think? Australia was also considered, but when they realised it was winter over there, they thought otherwise. Hawaii gave the filmmakers access to water where no land was visible, so the choice was made. There was just one issue, or like with certain presidents, several stormy ones. The filming area was plagued by strong winds and rain, which battered sets and even disturbed shots. Production had to shut down at least 3 times due to hurricane warnings. And a multi-million-dollar set was completely obliterated by a hurricane, causing it to sink. Because of this, the whole slaver faction subplot was removed from the script. And who knows, maybe this could have saved the movie. although that's about as likely as Costner requesting more bright lights on his hair. Local contractors, who everyone relied on for things like food service and construction needs, were also really expensive because they knew they couldn't be easily replaced. Then again, despite all of these issues, something made up for it. Kevin Costner made friends with a dolphin he called Noodle, and even fed it shrimp. So it wasn't all bad. One of the sets was so ridiculous it caused a steel shortage. That massive floating atoll set that a lot of the movie features on I mentioned earlier cost, remember that figure I said Costner put in? Yes, $22 million. The structure was 1/4 of a mile in circumference and weighed 1,000 tons. Yet despite all of this, they forgot one very important thing. Neither this set nor the 30 or so boats in the film came equipped with toilets. Filming had to be stopped for people to be transported to a nearby ship to relieve themselves. Or I assume the more disgusting members of the cast and crew just went over the edge. This colossal atoll set needed every piece of spare steel in Hawaii. Yes, that's right, they ran out, so needed more to be flown in from California. This might have been one of the most expensive sets of all time, but Waterworld injected roughly $35 million into the local Hawaiian economy. Add to that the swindling the local contractors were doing, and you've got yourself quite the boost to the local budget sheet.